Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Fantasy Fullback Dive, brought to you by the good people at the Roto Street Journal, paving your way to fantasy glory, acting as your lead blocker to fantasy excellence, making all your football-related fantasies come true. I'm your host, Nat the Truth Jones. We are coming off a Week 10 full slate of Sunday games, some of which really came down to the wire. We had some very exciting football. We had a couple shootouts, one really intense shootout. We had some last-minute wins / last-minute losses. We had our obligatory Giants embarrassment. We pretty much checked all the boxes today, and we had some really big fantasy scores for a couple guys. Unfortunately, I went against a couple of those gentlemen, so I am hanging on by a thread personally. And tonight's game, again, we got Jets, Raiders. I got nobody going. He's got nobody going, but we each got a guy in the Monday night game. So I would like to say I'm going to just sit back and enjoy this football game, but it's not one that figures to be that aesthetically pleasing. With me, as always, the Wolf of Roto Street himself, getting ready to try out a new format on the show.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive down. We're going to this time recap by fantasy scores. So top 10 fantasy scores, then any underwhelming names at any position that surprised us, that underperformed relative to what we were expecting, any other handful of guys we wanted to touch on in that span as well. And we'll wrap up, as we always do, with the early look at the Week 11 waiver wire this time as well. I think it will be a nice format, though, because it won't require us to be completely reliant on just a quick 4 p.m. box score scan. That's all built into here now.
Yep.
And just a preface on the scoring, too, it is going to be based on DraftKings, so it's full PPR. There are bonuses for 100-plus receiving, 300-plus passing. They might sound a little higher fantasy points-wise. We'll still have the exact stat lines and the exact order of how the scores shook out today. Just the exact fantasy point totals might be a little bit higher than what your league goes, but still should be a very similar order in the ultimate shake of things.
Yeah, I don't think the order will change too much, but yeah, a couple of the scores might be a little higher. I know they're a little bit higher than my league, but comparable enough where this is still going to be some good stuff. You ready to get into the quarterbacks?
Let's do it.
All right, let's start off with the guy that outpaced all the other quarterbacks by almost 10 fantasy points on DraftKings, and that's Dak Prescott, a guy I threw in as a nothing kind of addition to my Amon-Ra St. Brown, Raheem Mostert trade. And now, of course, he's scoring 40-plus fantasy points a game, 26 out of 35 through the air for 404 yards, 4 touchdowns. He did get picked once, but he also rushed twice for 17 and another score. So 5 total touchdowns for Prescott. And they destroyed the Giants, who are beyond an embarrassment, by a score of 49-17. Big game from Dak.
Yes, his second game in the last 3 with 4 or more touchdowns. Just an absolute monster. He hasn't had less than 30 DraftKings fantasy points now in 3 straight weeks. An absolute animal. They've truly embraced that pass-happy attack. Another huge 4 p.m. score today was Justin Herbert, 323 yards and another 4-touchdown day for him. An interception as well, but a whopping 32.4 fantasy points in DraftKings formats, 4 rushes for 15 yards as well. A monster day for Herbert in that great shootout between them and the Lions.
That was a great shootout, and I went against Herbert, and I also went against Keenan Allen, so that was nice. Guy that you're looking smarter and smarter on with every passing week, Sam Howell.
Yeah.
Redskins did lose 29-26 to the Seahawks, but Howell got 312 yards on 29 out of 44 in the air, 3 touchdowns against no picks. He did fumble one time. He rushed also twice for 17 yards, but 28 points by DK, by their scoring system. That is not nothing, and good for third on the list today.
Yeah, and on the other side of those things, Geno Smith, 369, 2 touchdowns, the best game we've seen from him in a long time. 1 rush, 13 yards, ultimately 27 fantasy points in the DraftKings format. Not bad at all.
5th on the quarterback list, Josh Dobbs. How fun is it to be on the Josh Dobbs train right now? Seriously.
He's the best. I'm in love with this guy.
It's just kind of fun. It just makes you feel good. He went 23 out of 34 for 268 yards and a score. He also rushed 8 times for 44 and another score. And more importantly, not fantasy-wise, but more importantly, the Vikings won again. They beat the Saints 27-19. Dobbs put up 25 fantasy points. He's undefeated as the quarterback of the Vikings.
Yeah, 3rd straight game with 25 or more fantasy points for Dobbs as well. 2nd behind only Lamar Jackson among quarterbacks in rushing, too. What a great season this kid's having. What a great story it is. But speaking of great seasons, great stories, none really get better than C.J. Stroud. 356 yards and a touchdown. 1 interception as well, 2 rushes, 8 yards, and another score on the ground. He did lose 2 fumbles, so the turnovers weren't great today. The fantasy points were 25 fantasy points on DraftKings today. Really solid day for C.J. Stroud.
Other side of the ball, very comparable fantasy numbers from Joe Burrow. Again, they lost to the Texans. They was on the wrong side of C.J. Stroud. Everybody's been on the wrong side of C.J. 27 out of 40, 347 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. Of course, we know he did have a somewhat depleted receiving squad. Still, he did add another 5 rushes for 20 yards, and he almost hit 25, literally 24.88 according to DraftKings. Good game statistically for Burrow, but I'm sure that's a loss that is going to eat at them.
I know. Oh man, some crazy scores today. That was just one of many. Jared Goff in that crazy shootout game did his part too. 333 yards, 2 touchdowns, 24 DK points here today. Got it done on the road, which has always been a concern with Jared Goff. Has never really has these spike weeks. Well, hey, a top 10 quarterback week for you with Jared Goff. Just about rounding out the list at the QB8 for this week.
San Francisco throttled Jacksonville 34-3. I posited the question, this purely speculative question on the last pod, is Brock Purdy's moment over? And you basically shamed me off the set. Today he went 19 of 26 for 296 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. He looked pretty darn good. Jacksonville looked pretty darn bad. Spoiler alert, Trevor Lawrence is going to be in our underwhelming column coming up very shortly.
Yeah, and then rounding out the top 10 quarterbacks for the week, Baker Mayfield, his fourth of his last 5 games. He's been a top 12 quarterback, a true quarterback one, doing his part against Tennessee today with 278 yards, 2 touchdowns, 12 rushing yards there for him. Just a nice solid day yet again for Baker. The only other quarterbacks of note that just were decently scores today, Jordan Love did have his season high with 289 yards, 2 touchdowns, did have 2 picks as well, but 18 fantasy points was as good as he's been since week 2. I also wanted to mention Kyler Murray. Doesn't have a huge passing day, 249 yards, an interception, no touchdowns, and yet he still gets to 18 fantasy points because of 33 yards, touchdown on the ground, 6 rushes. And just for the eyeball test, he looked as nimble as he always looks. It did not really seem to have much rust on him, seemed to be as quick as ever, no real lingering effects of the ACL. As far as I could tell, I don't even think he was wearing a brace. He looked really good out there today, Kyler Murray. Those were the other ones I noted. Any others that you want to touch on, Truth, or either of those guys?
I would say that's the more. But when I saw Kyler, I don't know if you just mentioned this or not because I was reading some of his stats. I mean, he looked super mobile. I mean, did you talk about? I don't know if you mentioned the 4th down play that he made.
Yeah, I didn't mention that, but I just mentioned in general.
That was incredible. I mean that kept the drive going. And then he has a real good connection with Trey McBride. We're going to talk about him later. That was pretty awesome to see.
Yeah, absolutely.
As we move to the underwhelming list, I'm going to start the underwhelming list off with Lamar Jackson. He was not the most underwhelming guy on the list. He actually is only like 2 points lower than Deshaun Watson, 3 points lower than Kyler Murray. But for Lamar, this was an underwhelming game. They lost on a kind of, they got to feel bad about this loss to the Browns 33-31. He went 13 out of 23 for 223, 1 touchdown, 2 picks. That's no good. 8 rushes for 41 yards. That's pretty measly for Lamar. So, yeah, if you started him, I think he was a QB 14 on the day. Obviously, you're looking for a lot more than that out of him.
Yeah, really tough day, but probably the most underwhelming quarterback of the day, Trevor Lawrence.
Sure.
What a horrendous season he is having. 185 scoreless yards, 2 picks, 7 yards on the ground, and another fumble loss, 3 total turnovers, 5 total fantasy points today for Trevor Lawrence, this guy that was the lock QB7 after the top big 6 are gone. Man, he is underwhelmed completely. He has not had a single game above 19 fantasy points, just 1 top 11 finish on the year. Really, really a ugly season for Trevor Lawrence right here.
It was awful, and we talked about it. He hasn't – you said you can pretty much set your watch to 16. He's going to underwhelm. He's going to score 16 fantasy points. Did not even sniff that today.
No,
he has not really had a big game all year. Taylor Heineke, a lot of people were talking themselves into Taylor Heineke. He actually got benched for Desmond Ridder. His stats on the day were 8 out of 15, 55 yards, 1 touchdown. He rushed 4 times for 34 yards, did not score. And Ridder did actually get them back into the game, and they ended up losing on a last-second field goal to the Cardinals.
Oh, man. Yeah, that was a lot of fun games here, especially in the afternoon slate. That was a fun 4 p.m. slate of action other than that Giants ass-kicking. Kenny Pickett, definitely on the underwhelming list here. 126 scoreless yards, 4 rushes, 16 yards. And ultimately, as we'll talk about when we get to wide receivers, just bringing down all ships with him too. Very, very lackluster passing game, strong running game that we're going to talk about momentarily.
Will Levis, a lot of people wanted to be on this train. The Titans were just bad all over.
Yeah.
I mean, everywhere. Derrick Henry was terrible. We'll talk about him briefly later. Levis went 19 out of 39 for 199 yards, no touchdowns, 1 pick. Scored less than 7 fantasy points. That is just for a quarterback that we thought, oh man, he can really sling it. Man, this was disappointing. They lost 20-6 to the Bucks.
Doubled up by Tommy DeVito, who had 15 points himself. Not even a horrible effort by DeVito, at least compared to some of these other duds. The rest of the names down here, you kind of expect. Bryce Young, you already mentioned Taylor, Mac Jones getting benched. That game was, Gardner Minshew certainly not coming through at all, 6.6 fantasy points. So no names you really are shocked to hear other than some of those ones we went through. The only other note, too, at quarterback was Derek Carr got injured, and Jameis Winston come in, played only 20 minutes compared to 37 for Carr. He had 11 fantasy points in less than a half of action, slinging the thing around, 2 touchdowns quickly. Certainly helped out Olave, as we're going to talk about soon. But yeah, so that wraps up our quarterbacks. We're going to move on to running back. But we'll pack that thumbs up, especially early on in the show. It really does help us get out to more people, about 15 or so in here with us at this beautiful Sunday night. Would love to get more of you. So like, shares, retweets, all that good stuff. If you enjoy what you hear, if this is a helpful show to you, if you like the new format, let us know too as we go down the list, the top 10 and underwhelmers and all that. You feel like this format's good? We're always open to feedback. So thank you again so much for being here. Let's now dive into our Week 10 running backs recap.
All right, Brian Robinson's actually going to lead the pack here on running backs, although he mostly did it all in the receiving game. He rushed 8 times for 38, no touchdowns, nothing too spectacular there, but he caught 6 balls on 6 targets for 119 in a score. That was enough to give him 30 and change PPR points. So he's actually at the top of the stack, although he didn't really do it in the running game per se.
No, what's wild too is Antonio Gibson had 16.5 points, 5 catches, 42 yards, and a touchdown as well on 6 targets. Seahawks just got absolutely dismantled. This is now the second week in a row they've given up at least 3 touchdowns to an entire backfield as a whole. We saw the Ravens just bludgeon them last week. So something to keep a note. The Seahawks, definitely a spot you want to fire up your running backs. The number 2 running back of the week and also the number 7 running back of the week share the backfield. Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. This was a strange one. 14 carries, 77 yards, and 2 touchdowns for Jahmyr Gibbs. Noteworthy that both of those touchdowns came right at the goal line. They just continued to ride Jahmyr Gibbs. The first one kind of made sense to me. He had an explosive play. He got it down to the 1. The team decided to repay him. Okay, that makes sense. But then he remained the goal line back the next drive, and they didn't sub in David Montgomery. And now my whole universe is flipped because then later in the game, David Montgomery, again, the number 7 running back of the week, he had a 75-yarder. You'd think that those would be if I was telling you 2 lines running back stat lines, you would definitely assume the other one did what the other one did. It just is absolute mind F right now. David Montgomery ultimately finished with 116 yards and a touchdown. So they both got there, over 20 fantasy points for both guys, but just so weird at how they got there. And I don't know. It just kind of makes my mind explode a little bit.
They're both really good. It's so good to see them producing. I mean, Montgomery, he's just impressed all year, and it's not like he's getting the work because Gibbs has sucked. Gibbs has been really good lately, and they're both totally viable. I'd say essential fantasy starters, even though they're both getting so much.
Yeah, similar split, but they're so talented, and the line is so good too that this is a backfield that can sustain 2 miles and clearly can sustain 2 top 10 miles at that.
It sure looks like it. We have a similar situation in Pittsburgh. I'll let you do that one next. Before that, we will talk with Devin Singletary, who I could have had for nothing on waivers, basically. And then I was just like, yeah, I've done a story about him. We've talked about him on the pod. He's terrible. I'm not picking him up. Cue Devin Singletary getting 30 rushing attempts for 150 yards and a touchdown. He also added a catch for 11 yards, scoring over 26 fantasy points in that aforementioned 30-27 Houston victory over the Bengals. 30 rushes for 150 yards.
And he looked good, too. I mean, it's the first time a running back has looked even halfway decent. Everyone actually good there for Houston. So I think and they have a joke backfield, a joke schedule for running backs moving forward. We'll talk about that a bit more because he's still out there in over half of leagues right now. When we get to the early waiver wire, we'll dive into his rest of season prospects a bit more. But damn, what a great effort from him. Looking really solid there. Yeah, so our number 5 running back of the week in fantasy scoring, or number 4 rather, score, and also the number 8. So another one of those backfields with 2 of the top scorers. Jaylen Warren this time at the top list, 22 DraftKings points, 15 rushes, 101 yards, and a touchdown in addition to 2 catches, 9 yards, 4 targets for him. But Najee Harris also getting in there. Definitely took a little bit more work for him. 16 carries, 82 yards and touchdown, 3 catches for 14 yards as well, 4 targets. I'll say it. I know everyone hates on Najee. I think he's actually looked kind of solid with the ball in his hands these last few weeks. He doesn't look nearly as sluggish as I think a lot of people have made him out to be. I think it's just because Jaylen Warren looks so damn explosive every time he touches it. But they had very similar workloads here, 17 touches total, for Warren compared to 19 touches for Najee Harris. It is definitely getting closer and closer to that 50-50 split. And it honestly seems like both guys are benefiting from this type of committee setting where they're both maintaining a little bit more explosiveness because of it.
Austin Eckler actually came in at number 5 on this list. And, it's funny. He scored over 21 fantasy points in PPR format. Kind of seemed like an underwhelming game, especially given the fact that the Chargers put up 38. He had 19 rushes for 67 yards, so not an extremely good yards per carry clip. He did score. He also added 4 catches, which you love from him, for 48 yards. He was targeted 7 times. Like I said, 28.5 fantasy points. Just kind of want to be greedy as an Eckler owner. If the Chargers score 38, you'd almost like to see more out of him, but still good enough to be a top 5 running back for the week.
I get what you're saying, though. If you didn't know the game and like what the box score was, you'd come out of that being like, Eckler probably had a 40-point day, didn't he? Nah.
Right.
Still a 21, you can't complain.
When he's good, it's top 5.
I know. Christian McCaffrey, long live the touchdown streak, no longer. Gets cut off at 17 games. What an epic streak, though. They were trying real hard to get him to that record of 18, but ultimately it did not work. 16 carries, 95 yards, 6 catches, 47, 20 fantasy points, 10 targets for the guy. It's just crazy that even without a touchdown, 20 points is his floor. Like, it's just so ridiculous. The guy is so talented in every single facet of the game.
He's absolutely great. Kenneth Walker, who I had the misfortune of going against, didn't even have a good game. He rushed 19 times for 63 yards, but then he did all his damage. He had 1 reception on 2 targets. It went for 64 and a touchdown. So that saw him end the day with 19.7 fantasy points in PPR. And, basically it's similar to Brian Robinson, where he did not really do much on the ground at all, like 3 yards a carry, something like that. But the 1 catch and the touchdown, well, there's 12 points right there. So there you go.
Yeah, Charbonnet was still mixing in for a decent amount of the snaps, most of the passing down work, but definitely Ken Walker doubled him up in touches with 20 touches for him, just 10 touches for Charbonnet, 6 rushes, 44 yards, 4 catches, 18 yards on his 5 targets through the air. So he has had, a 10 PPR point day. It's not bad for Charbonnet, but definitely took a clearer back seat than we've seen in the past few weeks. We already covered Najee as our 8th highest score. So Alvin Kamara just rebounding pretty nicely, similar to what's his name? Christian McCaffrey, no touchdowns and still nearly breaking 20 fantasy points, 9 carries, 42 yards, 7 catches, 33 yards, just 7 targets. It almost feels like a down game for him. It will be interesting to note, if Jameis does take over, I think that would take a little bit of the shine out of Kamara's stock, just because Jameis, we saw it, so clearly willing to push the ball downfield versus those little checkdowns we often see Carr just dumping right off to him. So just an intriguing note there to see what this offense might look like should Jameis take the reins moving forward.
That rounds out the top 10 for running backs. Also worth noting, Rashad White, Bijan Robinson, Deontay Foreman, they all scored in the 17-point range. Robinson getting a lot more action than Algier in that Falcons game and outperforming in fantasy-wise as well. Omar F. just came in with a nice comment, says Najee and Warren are a lot like Monty and Gibbs, but they're a low-calorie, less tasty version. Like that.
Yeah, exactly. The fast food version of them. Yeah, that's a great comparison. But I did want to just touch on the fact that Bijan, 22 carries, 1 catch, so 23 total touches, 95 yards, and a score, finally getting some red zone work was great to see. And as you mentioned, significantly out-touching Algier finally for the first time, only 10 total touches going Algier's way, 9 carries, 31 yards, 1 catch for 7 yards as well. They were playing from behind most of the game, so oftentimes that is the script that favors Bijan, but to just start the game, to get such a clear, dominant workload slice there was great to see, and you can feel a little bit better. And their schedule is really nice moving forward. So if you had bought low on Bijan, good for you, and maybe you could still try to sneak one in because it didn't truly light up the scoreboard. 17 fantasy points, a good day, best day he's had in a while, but I could see him starting to, if this is going to be his workload moving forward, we're going to be looking at 20, 30 pointers down the line. So this could be your chance to go in on him. That wrapped up our top 13 running backs for the week. The only other notes that I wanted to mention was Jonathan Taylor, 14.5 fantasy points. Weren't huge, but we only got like 1, maybe 2 touches total for Zach Moss. It was an absolutely dominating workload for Jonathan Taylor, almost 80% of the snaps, definitely over 80% of the work. So that was good to note. And then also Jerome Ford, seeing a lot of work and didn't get a touchdown, so his final stats weren't enormous, but 17 carries.
That's pretty good, though.
Yeah, 107 yards, 1 catch for 2 yards on his 1 target. Meanwhile, Hunt, he did get a touchdown, and that's always going to be the rub here. Is he's so good at the stripe that's just going to keep happening. 10 carries himself, 32 yards, and a score there. But it is clearly Jerome Ford, over 65% of the snaps in back-to-back weeks, over 60% of the rushes in back-to-back weeks. It's definitely the Jerome Ford RB1, Hunt RB2 goal line type of guy.
All right, so we're going to go to the underwhelming backs, and I'm going to cheat. I'm actually going to do the first two because they're personal to me. We talked about Jerome Ford. He's sitting on my bench. The reason he's on my bench with that decent performance is because I started Derrick Henry and Tony Pollard. Derrick Henry, 3 total fantasy points. He rushed 11 times for 24 yards. He also added a catch for, guess what, -4 yards. 3 total fantasy points. It's worth noting that Tyjae Spears had 10 fantasy points. That was almost all in the passing game. He also couldn't run at all. The Titans overall were a total joke, but 3 points from Henry. That was a real tough pill to swallow. Almost as tough as the Tony Pollard. Well, we're so used to this. Henry had 2 or 3 good games in a row. Tony Pollard has just been pretty much bad every week, but this was bad even for him. 15 rushes for 55 yards, no catches on no targets. It's hard to catch a ball when you've never got targeted. And so, of course, he put up no points there. Anyway, he had 5.5 total fantasy points. I get it. It was game flow. By the second half, he really wasn't even playing that much. He maybe got 1 carry in the second half. I don't care. It was still awful.
Yeah, to just make matters worse, 12 carries go to Rico Dowdle, 79 yards and a touchdown. Honestly, every time Dowdle touched the ball, it was like he brought way more juice than Pollard, which is not what we're used to. Obviously, Pollard all last year, one of the most explosive, efficient backs in NFL history. He was not been the same since that surgery.
Wasn't he your overall number 4 guy? Wasn't he at the beginning of the season like 4th on your list?
Yes, and he was the running back 4 in fantasy last year on like half the workload. He just is not the same guy anymore. It's not Tony Pollard. I don't know what it is. I have no clue what it is. Honestly, I'd be a little bit worried about Rico Dowdle taking this backfield over at some point because he is bringing way more than Tony Pollard.
I'm not worried about it because I'm just going to bring Jerome Ford in.
Exactly.
Just start him over Pollard.
Are you going to hate cut Tony Pollard?
I'm not going to hate cut him, but I mean, I have enough backs at this point where I can put him on my bench. I have Henry today. I have Montgomery. I have Jerome Ford. I don't need to have Tony Pollard in the game.
Yeah. Well, if we're talking about underwhelming backs that are personal best, Saquon Barkley, 13 carries, 66 yards, 1 catch for -5. And I think that was the most disappointing part, just the 3 targets. Because in DeVito's previous starts, we were getting like 40% disgusting target shares, but at least the ball was just getting checked, dinked and dunked to Saquon Barkley. So a tough day at the office for him. He's not going to be facing the Cowboys every week. And honestly, DeVito, he looked better than truly, you couldn't have got much worse than what we've seen. But I'm certainly not excited about the Giants moving forward. But DeVito does seem to be growing a little bit each and every week. He wasn't complete. Like we said, he doubled up. Trevor Lawrence. He had 3 times the fantasy points of Trevor Lawrence this week. So ultimately, we see some positive trends from him. I'm not panicking on Barkley here, but it is just it's awful. Like the line got hurt again. Andrew Thomas comes back and then he's carted off. There's no gaining any consistency there.
It's not his fault, but he's not a viable fantasy option, really.
No.
Travis Etienne, he add him to the list, of Jaguars who sucked. It's interesting. Jaguars lost 34-3. We talked about how bad Lawrence is. I did randomly, I'm jumping positions here. I did randomly get big numbers out of Christian Kirk. Again, somehow, everybody does terrible, and Christian Kirk gets like 16 fantasy.
It's crazy, anyway, isn't
it? That's another position. We'll talk about him later. Travis Etienne was a disaster. He rushed 9 times for 35 yards. He added 2 catches for 9 yards. Good for 6 fantasy points. What a duck.
Yeah, Dearness Johnson was getting worked in too. He had 6 points, just 0.4 less, or 0.4 more rather for Etienne. There 2 catches, 28 yards for Dearness Johnson, 3 carries, 12 yards. I think that was more just blow up, mop up duty, but just weird that it's been such a dominant share for Etienne all year to see him kind of giving things up. Ultimately, Aaron Jones, after being cut loose the week before, he can't really escape from A.J. Dillon this week. Ultimately, looking at their counting stats here, 13 carries, 35 yards, a horrible per clip there, under 3 yards per clip for Aaron Jones, 4 catches for 19 yards, 9.4 in PPR leagues. A.J. Dillon, not too far off there, 9.1 points for him, 9 rush attempts, 70 yards, just 4 carries, less carries there, 1 catch, 11 yards. So he ultimately, 81 yards for Dillon compared to 55 for Aaron Jones on a lot more work for Jones. Just not what you want to see. It seems like the cliff may have hit here for Aaron Jones, or at least he's just not fully healthy. It's gross.
Last on the underwhelming list, Alex Madison, who actually got hurt. 8 rushes, 27 yards, added 1 catch for 6 yards. That was good for 4.3 fantasy points. It's worth noting that Ty Chandler came in and did score over 10 fantasy points, but obviously nobody was starting him. So if you had Madison, you got a pretty much dud there out of him.
Yeah, and I did want to mention Keaton Mitchell as well. He had another long touchdown today, 35-plus yard touchdowns in back-to-back games. He's the first Ravens running back to ever do that in back-to-back games. You still got to note that there was only 5 total opportunities for him on the day. He was getting moved all over the place. He had an end zone target in that game as well. I really do think he could evolve into this. We've made this comp before. The Devon Achane of the Ravens, one of the most fertile run games out there. But still, we need to get more than 20% of the snaps. We need to get more than just 5 opportunities a game. But right now, I mean, do we? Because he's got another 14-point fantasy day on his resume with only 5 touches. Seems like one of those guys that can just truly hit that home run any given time. The speed just pops right off the tape. All righty. That wraps up running backs for us. We got some huge receiver games here, Truth. Absolutely massive days. Starting at the top of the list, Keenan Allen, 43.5, 11 catches, 175 yards, 2 touchdowns, 14 targets. He's been really solid all year, had kind of started the year with these type of huge monster days and seemed to peter off a little bit. Man, right back into that true dominant wide receiver 1. He's left the game with a shoulder injury for a little bit, came right back and scored another deep touchdown after. Stud, absolute stud in every sense of the word.
I'm going to hit 2 and 3 together because they're on the same team, believe it or not. CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks both lit it up. I had like a combined 75 fantasy points. We talked about Dak's big day, so it shouldn't surprise you that he had a couple receivers really light it up. CeeDee Lamb was also targeted for. This is very similar to Keenan Allen stat line. Targeted 14 times, 11 catches, 151 yards, 1 touchdown, good for 42.5 fantasy points. Not too bad. He also rushed once for 14 yards. Oh my, he scored on that one as well. Brandon Cooks was targeted 10 times, caught 9 of them. Not too bad. He actually had more yards than CeeDee Lamb, 173 and a score. Good for a little over 35 fantasy points. What a production for both those guys.
I mean, it's just so beautiful to see the Cowboys finally lean back into what they did so well these past 4 years. They tried to force this shitty Brian Schottenheimer run-heavy, disgusting attack for those early portions of the season. They have now decided to make CeeDee Lamb and the passing game, Dak Prescott, the centerpiece of it. And since they've done that, CeeDee Lamb just has been 12 catches, 158 yards, 2 touchdowns, 14 targets, 11 catches, 191 yards, 16 targets, 11 catches, 151, 1 TD, plus that rushing TD, as you mentioned already. 3 straight games of just 35 or more fantasy points. It is ridiculous, and his schedule is so juicy the rest of the way. He has to, as I'm going to do my rest of the season big board on Monday, he's got to be in contention for number 1 receiver around Tyreek Hill, A.J. Brown. Is he even better? I don't know. It's crazy. But also Brandon Cooks, you mentioned too. Yeah, 37% roster. He's out there in a ton of leagues right now, as well as his passing attack continues to go bananas. Number 4 receiver of the week was Amon-Ra St. Brown, 8 catches, 156 yards, 1 touchdown, 9 targets, which is actually like a season low for him. What a monster day. Yeah, it's crazy stuff. He is just so steady each and every week. The true first rounder that he deserves to be. That game was so much fun, and he was a big part of it.
He's great. Mike Evans, we talked about how bad Tennessee was. The Bucs were the beneficiary of that. They won 20-6. Evans did his part, man. 6 catches on 10 targets, 143 yards and a score. We've seen this stat line so many times out of him. It was good for 29.3 fantasy points. Wow.
Yeah, he's just so good. Chris Godwin, meanwhile, 9.4, didn't do anything. That's been the narrative all season here, that Evans is the guy to have. Noah Brown, 27.2 fantasy points.
I wrote about him.
Yeah, deservedly so. I mean, he was just an absolute monster. This is now his 3rd straight week leading the Browns in receiving. This is a career high. And it's after back-to-back weeks now. He's gone career highs in back-to-back weeks. 8 targets, 7 catches, 172 yards. No Nico Collins. No problem. Noah Brown emerged as that true wide receiver 1. Although not to be outdone by Tank Dell, just outside the top 10 receivers this week. The wide receiver 11 with a whopping 14 targets. Only had 6 of them, so not quite as efficient as Noah Brown. 56 yards and a score, though, for Tank Dell as well, 18.9. Not a shabby day at all, but man, Noah Brown, oh, what an absolute studly day.
I'm going to hit the next 2 together because they're teammates. We've had a couple duos perform really, really well today. Jamar Chase, we're used to that. 5 catches, 124 yards on 6 targets. He did score. That was good for 26.4 fantasy points. Remember, this was in a loss to the Texans we talked about, but Burrow did put up numbers. We mentioned Tyler Boyd also in T. Higgins' absence looked really good. Higgins did have a good game last week. I was disappointed not to see him in this week. Boyd was targeted actually 12 times, twice as many as Chase, believe it or not. Yeah. He caught 8 of them for 117. He didn't score, but he still managed 22.7 fantasy points. So that was pretty awesome to see.
I know he just had that late touchdown at the end of the game. I don't know if you caught it, but he should have had another touchdown added to this as well. It essentially cost the Bengals the game as well. So tough night for Boyd in that real life sense, but man, what a huge fantasy day. And if T. Higgins, they're saying it might be week to week, he's going to be out for any extended period of time. It's clear that Tyler Boyd will be more than capable of shouldering that slack. Emerging in the top 10 late of the 4 p.m. window was Tyler Lockett, 92 yards, 8 catches, 10 targets, a beautiful touchdown. It's one of those touchdowns that he's known for in his career. How did that one get in there? How did he haul that in? He's so small, but he somehow plays so big for his size and makes these contested grabs that just blow your mind. Tyler Lockett yet another huge day, while DK Metcalf ultimately, so 23 points for Tyler Lockett, and Metcalf himself was under, not horrible, I guess, 16.8 points at the end of the day for Metcalf, 7 catches, 98 yards. Did lead the team with his 12 targets as well. So solid day for him. I guess it was Jackson Smith-Njigba who must have taken the back seat. 9.3 fantasy points there, just 4 catches, 53 yards on 5 targets. I know he had 3 catches for 33 yards in the first drive, so he really just kind of became an afterthought in this game plan. They lean on the 2 big guns, and the big guns did okay for him. They ended up coming through there. DK, a bunch of his yards, though, came right at the end of the game, right? Like on that last, Hail Mary drive to get him in field goal range. So yeah, Seahawks, ultimately, it looked like they were going to be underwhelming. At least 2 of the guys came for you by the end of that game, though.
So Lockett rounds out the top 10, actually, and I kind of feel like that's a good place to end the list because those are the 10 guys that scored over 21 points. It is worth noting Jaden Reed did have 19.4 for the Packers. Granted, when Jordan Love finally puts up some points, it's not to Christian Watson, of course.
Of course. We'll talk about him, too.
Underwhelming guys?
I did actually want to hit Chris Olave as well. He had 21.4.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you already said him.
No, Tyler Lockett snuck in ahead of him, but he did round out the top 10, Olave. And the big note there was, he ultimately had a solid stat line, of course, and at 6 catches, 94 yards, a touchdown, 9 targets. The best stats we've seen from him. Not the best target share, not the best air yard share that we've seen all year, but certainly getting it more realized. But the big thing was 1 target, 15 yards, in 37 minutes with Derek Carr. 9 targets, 7 catches, 79 yards, and a touchdown in 20 minutes with Jameis Winston, including a 24-yard catch called back on penalty. So he almost had over 100 yards with Jameis Winston in just 20 minutes of play. So should this linger with Derek Carr, as effed up as it is to say, as fantasy owners, you got to be kind of rooting for at least Jameis Winston to outplay him and take over, but he doesn't have to be injury-related. But clearly, Chris Olave has such a significantly higher ceiling with Jameis Winston. We only needed 20 minutes to realize how much more appealing that will be. So yeah, huge notes of there. There were a ton of other, in terms of not underwhelming, but other notes to note. Demario Douglas did put up 14.4 points. It's such a bad passing attack. We don't even know who the quarterback's going to be for the Patriots, but a guy that's out there in almost 80% of leagues right now. And he was by far the clear target leader with those 9 looks. No one else even coming close. Just 1 catch for Juju, 3 for Hunter Henry. You mentioned Christian Kirk. You're still somehow getting 18 fantasy points with everybody else around him struggling. We talked about Brock Purdy's really solid day. Well, everybody was able to get fed. Debo, 15.9. Ayuk, 14.5. We talked about 20 for CMC. We'll talk about Kittle when we get to tight ends in a little bit. And I just also wanted to mention, too, that, Dobbs had that great game. Addison, 10.9 PPR points, not bad. Watson also keeping Amari Cooper 15.8 and Elijah Moore 15.4 in a really tough matchup against the Ravens. To see both of those guys have really solid outings, especially Cooper, who just continues to get it done time and time again. I thought those guys deserved mentioning despite not being in the top 10. Still some intriguing receiver performances there. You want to kick off the underwhelmings?
Yeah, let's go underwhelming. And, we talked about the Steelers having that Monty Gibbs light running attack. Well, they did really well. The receiving core was the opposite of that. George Pickens was targeted 4 times. He caught 3 of them for 45 yards. That was good for a measly 7.5 fantasy points. Not to be outdone, Deontay Johnson also targeted 4 times, caught 1 for 17, good for 2.7 points. Disgusting.
Just really disgusting indeed. Drake London, he hit it up okay. 3 catches, 36 yards. I shouldn't say okay. That's a really bad day at the office. But he only had 1 catch for 7 yards through the last drive or 2. He racked up a couple late catches to somewhat salvage the day, but still, 3 for 36. Nothing special at all there.
We talked a little bit about Christian Watson sucking, and he did. He was targeted 7 times. He caught 2 of them for 23 yards. That was good for 4.3 points. A lot of people have been asking the last couple of weeks, is it time to cut this guy? Yes. I've always just been like, yes. And I still think so.
Yes. Oh, it's a strong, firm yes, indeed. Calvin Ridley. So, yeah, Christian Kirk can continue to be done time and time again. Ridley, no. We've seen how up and down it's been. I called him Fancy Gabe Davis, and this was another reminder why. 2 catches, 20 yards, 4 fantasy points, 3 targets. Just as bad as this offense has been, he has been so underwhelming as a part of it. Ugly. Just ugly.
The Titans were so bad today. Of course, DeAndre Hopkins was going to stink. He was targeted 8 times. He caught 3 for 27 yards. Sad to see DeAndre Hopkins reduced to something like this. His receiver in his receiver core with him, Kyle Phillips, did manage to catch 3 balls on 5 targets for 61 yards, a whopping 9.1. But still, better than Hopkins. Man, that was tough to watch.
Yeah. Marquise Brown, also tough to watch today. 1 catch, 28 yards. Did just barely miss a deep connection, though, with Kyler Murray. It was Murray's first game back. We know these two have made fantasy magic today in the past, rather. And ultimately, he did have A.J. Terrell shadowing him. We've seen wide receiver ones get shut down by the Falcons time and time again this year. So I'm not going to overly panic. In fact, with a trade deadline this next week and a juicy playoff schedule for Marquise Brown, a great pass history production with Kyler Murray, and Murray just looking good, I actually really want to try to buy low on Marquise Brown after this game.
And this is going to round out the underwhelming group. Terry McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, they were both horrendous. McLaurin was targeted 8 times. He caught 4 for 33 yards. That was good for 7.3 fantasy points. Better than Samuel, though. Samuel was targeted 6 times. He caught 2 of them for 6 yards. That's right, 6 yards, 1 yard per target.
And you know who was even worse? Jahan Dotson. 1 target, no catches, a absolute goose egg. So it's crazy. Sam
Not
Howell
even
has
good enough to make the underwhelming list.
Like it's crazy that Sam Howell could have 28 fantasy points and none of the 3 receivers were even relevant. Just absolutely wild.
That's impressive. That's a good point.
It is crazy. Last category here, we'll pack, and then we'll get on out of here. Quiz game and one last call. You're 20 of you here. Love to see it. A thumbs up button would really continue to help us grow. Like, shares, retweets, it all. We wouldn't beg for it if it didn't really help us. But thank you so much again as we climb towards 4K, helping us out. All right, so let's wrap up these tight ends, starting at the top of the list on a snap count. Ribs, they're bugging him. You got to be a little worried right now. TJ Hawkinson, 33 fantasy points, 11 catches on 15 targets from your tight end. 15 targets, 134 yards, a touchdown. This is the Josh Dobbs effect. We saw it all in Arizona. Love to pepper a corpse of Zach Ertz, and Trey McBride finally took over. It's always been the Josh Dobbs things, funneling looks to his tight ends, and Hawkinson is absolutely a vacuum, man. What a great day for him.
I mean, I'll tell you how I felt bad about a lot of things that happened with my team this week. Not this one. I managed to trade Darren Waller for this guy, Trey McBride, straight up. McBride was targeted 10 times. He caught 8 of them for $131. Did not score. Didn't matter. He did catch a really long pass near the end of the game that pretty much, just like ended things and allowed the Cardinals to win. 24.1 fantasy points. That's great for really any position, but for the tight end, I mean, come on. So Kyler Murray and him already have a great rapport. That was awesome to see. Great game for McBride. I'm very encouraged moving forward.
He is so dangerous with the ball in his hands. Like you don't see tight ends his size moving around like that. It is special, to say the least. George Kittle, we talked about Brock Purdy's huge day, and he certainly benefited. Even though 4 targets, that was it. Well, 3 of them going for 116 and a touchdown. Kittle doing Kittle things, the big play artist down the seam. A monster. And it's such a big drop off after that, 24, right. 23, and then it's kind of ugly the rest of the way here at tight end.
Yeah, I mean, these 3 were the only ones that really had huge standout games. Also, it's worth noting that on our last pod, you made some throwaway comment like, so-and-so isn't going to score you 30 points. George Kittle could, and I mocked you, and I was like, he's not going to score 30. I mean, he did score like 24. So he did. I was right. He didn't score 30, but, he made you sweat a little bit.
Got fairly close.
Right. Like we said, big drop off here, so we won't spend as much time on these guys. Jake Ferguson had 12.6 fantasy points. He was targeted 6 times. He caught 4 of them for 26 and a touchdown. Obviously, those are good tight end numbers, nothing like the first 3 guys. But if you start Ferguson, you're probably pretty happy.
Yeah, David Njoku as well in the PPR league at least did okay for you. 11.8, 6 catches, 58 yards, 9 targets. Just good to see Deshaun Watson looking his way. Early in the season, they did not seem to have any type of connection. Seems like those two are definitely linking up in a better place. And he did drop one that could have gone for another 15 to 20 yards as well. So solid day for a really athletic tight end. Solid.
Last tight end that we're going to mention, Dalton Schultz. 11.1 fantasy points. And, just also put this in context. We add him to Noah Brown. We add him to Tank Dell. This is just a dangerous receiving core at this point. He had 4 catches on 6 targets for 71. He didn't score, but his performance was still good enough as the tight end 6 on the day. So there you go.
Yeah, after that, in terms of some underwhelming guys at the tight end position, Mark Andrews, just 2 catches, 44 yards, 4 targets. We talked about Lamar's underwhelming day, and certainly that sunk Mark Andrews with him.
Yeah, Sam Laporta had an underwhelming day for him. He did end up with 8. But Brock Wright actually ended up eating a lot of his cheese. He got 10.2 fantasy points, and he scored the touchdown, of course, which is a real vulture job, which you hate to see. Honestly, though, I wouldn't be discouraged too much if I'm a Laporta owner. He's still clearly like an important part of the offense, and just 8 points, honestly, for a tight end is not bad. It's just we expect a little more from him.
Yeah, no, 5 targets was okay for Laporta. I think I was actually second on the team there. So not the worst of days, but not great either. Evan Ingram was my lower tight end of the week, and that ended up looking like a decent call here. Was outside the top 20 tight ends, 5.2 points. Still managed 7 targets. Still a good source of volume, but this volume was pure garbage today. We know how bad Trevor Lawrence wasn't. Sure, that made Evan Ingram just as bad. 4 catches, 12 yards, 5.2 PPR points. Bury the tape. Awful.
We're skipping this guy on the list, but I just want to point out that Kyle Pitts had the Kyle Pittsiest game ever. He had 3 catches for 30 yards.
Yeah.
Anyway, the Kyle Pitts game right there. Hunter Henry also the lousy game. 3 catches on 5 targets for 21 yards. The Patriots just absolutely suck ass in every possible thing. So I don't even know. It's not even really noteworthy that Hunter Henry had a bad game, but yeah, it was bad.
No, and we just want to mention I hyped up K-Dot and I hyped up Irv Smith as streamers. Sadly, that did not come through. My apologies if you went to use them. 3 points for K-Dot and 1.6 points for Irv Smith. Watching Tanner Hudson end up out targeting him. 6 catches for 33 yards for Hudson, 1 catch for Irv Smith. Certainly cut bait at this point. The only other thing I'm mentioning, not even on the underwhelming thing, but just the fact that Logan Thomas outscored all the receivers again today. Didn't have to do a lot to do so. Only 9 fantasy points, 5 catches, 40 yards, 5 targets. But he's been one of the steadier tight ends on the year. And I get a lot of can I cut Logan Thomas? And I just don't get why you'd want to. He's been so steady this year at a position that it's very hard to find anything consistent at.
Yeah, Moba Rono, who started listening to us, I want to say last week, maybe we started hearing from him. He's talking in the comments right now. And he did just point out the Patriots don't suck at running the ball at all. That's true. They actually ran the ball okay. I'm just talking about the whole package. They were so bad. I started the Colts defense today, and I felt great about it the entire time.
I don't even think we covered that note in the running backs, but I had them under they weren't in the top 10. Yeah. But it was noteworthy that both of those guys did go for double-digit points. 13.2 PPR points for Amandre, 20 carries, 88 yards, not bad. 3 catches, 14 yards, 5 targets. He's looking better and better by the week, but Zeke really showed more juice than I expected. 13 carries, 54 yards for Zeke, 2 catches for 34 yards, really looking nimble in space there, much more so than we saw from Zeke last year. So both those guys were okay. It's just such an awful overall offense that you can't really expect both these guys to be worth 10 or more points every single week. Ramondre's kind of emerging in that okay running back 2 territory, but I still don't. It's such a bad offense that, they're okay players in the backfield, no doubt, but I don't really want any of them in my lineup at any point.
All right, that's it. Why don't we throw real quick? Why don't you just rush through these waiver guys? I mean, a couple of guys leading your list, of course, Singletary and Noah Brown. I will just say before you get into those guys, because I know you can do this part better than me, I did an article on the Texans receiving core and C.J. Stroud and all that this week. Noah Brown was a mention. Now, I mentioned picking up Stroud. I mentioned you could even maybe possibly pick up Tank Dell. These were both long shots, but I said there's one guy you can definitely get if you want a piece of this aerial pie, and that was Noah Brown. He was 1% owned. He's now 24% owned. So a lot of people did pick him up, but he's still probably available in your league, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Out there in 76% of them. Definitely go check. He was and me and CJ talked about him a lot this week. If you needed a streamer, you had to go check and see if Noah Brown was out there. 8 targets, 7 catches, 172 yards, 3 straight weeks now leading this team in receiving. I get it. There was no Nico Collins. That opens up a huge vacuum. But now this is, again, 3 straight weeks. Robert Woods was back. It still is intriguing to see what's going to happen when all of these guys are healthy and out there. I think Robert Woods, we saw him already get kicked to the curb this week. He will be the one biting the bullet here and go to the irrelevancy, whereas Tank Dell, Noah Brown, Nico Collins, all of them can coexist. Brown's just a good player. He truly is. He's always open. He's where he needs to be. He has a great rapport there with C.J. Stroud. Now he's got over 325 receiving yards in 2 weeks right now. The guy is just going absolutely bonkers. You also mentioned, though, Devin Singletary, probably gone in your league, 49% rostered though. So he is out there in half of them. And we said 30 rushes, 150 yards, a touchdown, 1 catch for 11 yards as well. And I believe he finished with 90% of the snaps in this one. Nobody else mixing in at all. A very soft schedule here for the running backs. Arizona next week, 3rd most points. Jacksonville, an okay matchup, middle of the road. But then Denver, 1st most points. The Jets, 10th most points, and an okay playoff schedule with a couple games with Tennessee on the deck. So this does look like he had to take over this backfield officially and actually has some value in there. So definitely the Texans leading off the list. But you got to also take a look for Brandon Cooks. Got dropped by a ton of people out there. 10 targets this week, 9 catches, 173 yards, and that score. Believe he's now scored in 3 straight games. Definitely a low yardage total in there. So it became like, can I actually really ever put Brandon Cooks in my lineup? After a game like this, the way this pass game is cooking, the way they can get up big and they're still chucking it with Dak, they're playing at a different level. There is a different offensive scheme than what they entered the year with. And especially today, to watch them keep their foot on the gas pedal, it reminded me a lot of the Bills, where the Bills of the past few years, where they'll get up big and they don't care. They're just going to keep bombing you. They're not going to keep taking their shots. They're going to keep padding the stats. And I'm all for that. I love it for fantasy. So Brandon Cooks, definitely somebody moving forward you want to go check for. Ty Chandler, out touching. I was wondering if Alexander Madison got hurt. We haven't seen any news that he had. So I'm just guessing this was just pure ineffectiveness. 8 carries, 27 yards for Alexander Madison, continued to be one of the worst.
The only reason that I say that is that I was playing against Madison and an O came up next to his name for out at one point. And if it was pure ineffectiveness, I think they probably wouldn't have had anything there. That was the only reason I brought it.
Yeah, he must have had something then. So we'll keep our eyes peeled for the injury report. I have not seen anything. If you guys in the comments saw anything, let us know on Madison. Certainly Chandler, either way, definitely saw the work there. 15 carries.
Hold on. Actually,
yeah.
Wolf, Madison got concussed in the 3rd quarter.
Oh, okay. So that's good to know. So either way, we're going to highlight Ty Chandler as a waiver wire pickup. Sounds like just a douchebag. That's good to know. He got concussed.
I know, you're great.
Great news. That's fantasy. We are just sickos. We all are. Let's just embrace that for a second, how disturbed of human beings we are. But that does mean Ty Chandler probably going to make the start. There's only been one player all year to make it out of concussion protocol that same week. That was Brock Purdy. I don't expect Madison will make it out.
Probably shouldn't have.
No, and he probably shouldn't have it all. So Chandler, he'll get Denver next week is the matchup. The most points allowed to running backs will probably be the spot start that Ty Chandler gets for the week 11 backfield. What a juicy opportunity. This kid does make plays. I know his yards per clip wasn't great. Again, 15 carries, 44 yards in a score, but a very capable pass catcher. Flashed throughout the preseason. Really nice chunk plays after chunk plays in every facet of the game. I could see him having an 18 to 20 point day against Denver. And then after that, you get Chicago, 8th most points allowed, a bye week. And then you get the Raiders, 4th most points. So 3 straight top 10 matchups for this Vikings running game. That's why we were kind of suggesting that Madison is as ugly as he's been, not a horrible buy low, but with him out now, buy high on Ty Chandler. Spend the money you have to. This is going to be an interesting waiver wire week, Truth. Like the more we're diving into this all these players from Brandon Cooks to the Texans guys, Ty Chandler, like every single one that we're talking about, my gut reaction here is $20, $30 of your fab, probably worthwhile here this late in the season. We'll definitely dive more deeply on Tuesday where I do my solo waiver wire show. I go through the top 10, 7 p.m. Definitely come check that out. But a few other guys that will definitely be in that show. Jaden Reed, 5 catches, 5 targets, 84 yards, and a touchdown. This is now, I believe, definitely at least 2 straight weeks. I think 3 straight weeks. He's led this team in receiving. He definitely has the best rapport with Jordan Love of any of the receivers here. We know that Christian Watson cannot get anywhere close to Jordan Love's attention at this point, or they can never connect. The routes that Jaden Reed does certainly fit the mold better, higher percentage. Let the guy do this damage after the catch. A beautiful 35-yard touchdown. So he's been getting it done in the yak game. He's been getting it done deep down the field. Reed has been making plays all year, so I'm surprised to see him at only 21% rostered. I also, another rookie, Quentin Johnston, finally getting in on the scoring action this last week. Now, obviously, we know that Keenan Allen at this point, he got hurt, so it's going to be like, oh, man, do we have to blow everything to go get Quentin Johnston? But either way, he's going to likely, eyeball test-wise, we don't have the snaps exactly yet. He's going to be on the field pretty much every single one of them, 95% of the routes last week. I'm guessing he'll be right around 90% at least again. This time, 4 catches on his 4 targets, hauled them all in, 34 yards and a touchdown. Slowly but surely gaining that trust of Justin Herbert, slowly but surely emerging as the clear number 2 in this offense. But not a bad schedule moving forward as well for Quentin Johnston at only 29% rostered, cut by a lot of impatient owners, and understandably so. He was doing nothing. I really am intrigued to see what Quentin Johnston does down the stretch. Last guys of note here, Demario Douglas, 36% roster, got cut by a lot of people. 9 targets, 6 catches, 84 yards. All 3 of those led the Patriots here. We don't know who their quarterback's going to be, but definitely in PPR leagues, and especially half PPR too, we know he's going to be an 8 to 10 target guy every single week. We know that's how this Patriots offense has always operated through the slot here. And he looks good. Pop Douglas just looks good. He's the only meaningful weapon in this attack. Last guy I did want to mention was Michael Wilson. Just barely missed out on a touchdown. Got tackled on the 1-yard line there. Otherwise, we'd be looking at like a 14-point fantasy day. But still, respectable 7 points, just 3 catches, 34 yards. But again, nearly 4 catches and a touchdown added to that. So I like Michael Wilson. I'm intrigued because of how good Kyler Murray looked. And this is a guy that I think can nail every layer of the field. And I will be excited to see how his role grows here with Kyler Murray. I think this is one to get a week ahead on here. That's about it that I have for Waiver Wire Truth. Is there anybody you think I missed in that? I know it's pretty.
No, I feel like that was pretty thorough. But I agree with what you said at the outset, which is this is going to be an interesting waiver wire week. It might be the last big one of the year. You don't even know. So if you got something, it's worth investing in one or more of these guys if you got the money to do it.
Yeah, this is the time. Exactly. What are you hanging on to for at this point? This is going to be one of those weeks where there's going to be some difference makers to emerge. So I'm really excited to dive a little bit deeper into that one. All righty. I think that's about it. Thank you guys so much. The game is already kicked off, so we're going to bounce on out of here. But one last call for that thumbs up button. The next time I'll be live is Tuesday, 7 p.m. for your waiver breakdown, 7 p.m. Eastern time as well. As where we'll take all these questions, all these comments. Thank you. And some really good ones here in the mailbag too, by the way. Some good interactions, guys. You guys give me some good chuckles here. So thank you again so much for being here with us. All the recap content will be at rotostreetjournal.com as well. Rest of the season big board updated tomorrow. Week 11 rankings out there tomorrow as well because I'm a sicko. So thank you again so much, guys. And a wolf if it's a sheep, guys. Be the wolf. Later.